Have you ever been in a rut? I see lots of smiles and lots of heads nodding too. I know I have. In my house, I'm the chief cook and bottle washer. And I have to tell you that it's not easy cooking every single day. You get into a rut. Now, my husband is here with me in about the fourth or fifth pew, so he can't say anything about this because he doesn't do anything in the kitchen. But every so often it's like, oh no, not chicken again. Oh, haven't we had enough chicken? I used to go to the gym. Well, not like this, of course, but I used to go to the gym and I'd get on this machine and then that machine and then that machine, and I'd get in my car and go home and say, you just did what you do every single time you go to the gym. You're in a rut. Why don't you try to change it? Well, you know, getting out of a rut is not the easiest thing to do. But the only reason I bring it up today is because those religious leaders we heard in the gospel, they call them the religious leaders and authorities. I like to call them the politicians. They are complaining about Jesus because he says, I am the bread that came down from heaven. Now, I don't want to make them sound like the bad guys because they really did believe that God provides and God feeds us. The issue that they had with Jesus and his mother and his father is that they knew where he was from. I mean, that's the kid from Nazareth. He couldn't be the bread of heaven. They were in a rut. They knew just enough that they can't know anything more or could consider that there could be anything more. He couldn't be from heaven and from Nazareth. Well, let me ask you a question. How did you hear today's gospel? Now, Jesus says, I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever, and the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. I don't guess too many of you, this is the first time you've ever been in church. So if you've been in church before, you've heard those words many, many times. Are we in a rut? Do we hear them the same way we've always heard them? Or are these words from Jesus trying to tell us something a little bit different about ourselves that we really have to look into? First of all, it's always bread. I mean, really, how ordinary can you get? Simply bread. And why? Because in the ordinary is where we always find God face to face. Not on a mountaintop or not in a burning bush, but in the ordinary. Some of us go down to our kitchen, look out the window, and we wait for the coffee to percolate. And while we're looking out the window, we may see something or hear something, and God comes to mind. How many of us are on our hands and knees pulling weeds? And that's where we find God. Or we're sitting up, rocking a child. Or even more, we're sitting next to someone we love who's not doing well. These are the everyday moments where God resides and where God speaks to us. Now, we have to listen to that because later on in this gospel, Jesus says, not only am I the bread of life once, he says it twice. He's not talking necessarily about the Eucharist. I think that's where we, as people who believe in Jesus, come to get the bread of life. But I think he's really trying to say, yes, I am in that Eucharist, but I'm beyond that as well. Maybe you and I are to become the bread of life. Maybe you and I have to become a little bit more like Jesus. But how do you do that? I mean, who has ever done that? Well, think about the people in your life, the relationships you've had, the experiences you've had, all the ones that have fed you and nourished you and sustained your life. Think about a time when you felt fed and nourished. And I don't mean somebody who made supper for you. I'm talking about people who have given you their time, their presence, people who have loved you, people who have cared for you, people who have encouraged you. All of our lives are fed and nourished by those people. Sometimes it's not even what they say or do. A couple of weeks ago, I had to bury my oldest brother, Bill. And there were so many neighbors who had come to do their respects. And I walked out of there feeling so full, so fed, so nourished. And most of them had nice things to say, but there were so many people who didn't say anything. They didn't have to say anything. They were bread for me. It's in the people in our lives who love us and who care for us and who teach us and who are patient with us and who want to do the best for us. They are bread in our lives. So we get bread, yes, here, the bread of heaven at the table, but we get bread in so many other ways from so many other people. Now, let's flip that a little bit. When are we bread for each other? That's the hard question. Are we people who nourish one another? Are we people who really care for each other? Or are we people who just sort of treat people like, oh yeah, well, let's go on. Let's just pass them up. Let's not get involved. Are we bread that nourishes? Or are we sort of stale, dry bread? Well, we have to look at that. Because I think if we are like that, we're in a rut. We're in the rut that says, why? Why are you being given the bread of life, but not giving it away? Why aren't you bread for someone else? And we all have to ask that question, no matter who we are. We have to be attentive to the fact that we are bread. Jesus is not, he's only one loaf in the basket. We're all the other loaves out there. We're the ones who have to feed other people. We're the ones who have to be there for other people. Now, we have a problem, much like those politicians of the early time. We don't worry about where Jesus is from because we know where Jesus is from. He's from heaven. He came down from heaven. I mean, what else is there to know? Well, I guess what else there is to know is that maybe it's not only heaven where Jesus comes from. Maybe he comes from Asbury Park. Maybe even Uvalde in Texas. Oh, Gaza? You think Jesus could come from Gaza? Yes. That's the rut we get in. We think, oh, no. He's from heaven. He can't be from anywhere else. And here he is saying to us today, if you really want to be like me, then be like me. Be bread for each other. Now, bread depends on our appetite. It depends on what we want to eat. And I guess sometimes we have to look at ourselves and say, well, what is it I like to eat? What is it I hunger for? What is the bread I want? And we go to the scriptures and we hear them say, well, you know, there's lots of kinds of breads there. There's the bread of adversity. There's the bread of tears. There's the bread of affliction. The bread of mourning. The bread of wickedness. The bread of idleness. And it goes on and on and on. And Jesus says to us today, sit down, kids. There's only two kinds of bread. There's the bread that feeds and nourishes and sustains, and all the other breads leave you hungry and malnourished. So, what kind of bread will we be eating today? Will it fill us and nourish us, or will it leave us hungry and malnourished? Is it sustaining and enduring, or has it become hard and dry? The bread we choose says something about our appetite and what we hunger for. What's your hunger? I know what mine is. What's your appetite? I know what mine is. Do you need to change your diet? Do you need to choose a different bread? I do sometimes. Let's not forget the old cliche. You are what you eat. You've heard that a million times, I'm sure. So, if we want life, then we need to be eating the bread of life. And if we want to bring life to someone else, we need to be the bread of life. So again, not now, but this week, what kind of bread will you eat this week? What kind of bread will you be this week? Let's come here in a little while and eat the bread of heaven and see where it takes us. Amen.